For our final session of the morning, just the last 15 minutes, we're going to hear directly from the fintech that did the jump from Australia to the UK, Airwallex. Airwallex is an Australian global payment scale-up, which in April closed a whopping $160 million Series D round. To share their story and the lessons they've learnt, we're joined by James Butland, Airwallex's VP of Global Banking. Hello, James.
Hi, you can call us Airwallex or Airwallex, whatever you prefer, Isabel.
I was expecting an Aussie accent. They hired locally.
No. So I'm based in London, so I look after our European office and team here at Airwallex. But you're completely right. We started off down in Melbourne about 4.5 years ago now.
Brilliant. So I guess you would have been part of the journey into Europe, into the London expansion. But before we get into that, I wanted you to just explain to our audience just a little bit about who Airwallex are and how this business started.
Absolutely. So we're we start off as a payments and FX platform. So really a technology platform to help historically Australian businesses, when we first started back in 2015, who were importing and exporting from Australia, to enable them to buy goods overseas at a lower cost, and have some certainty around those payments, when those payments would settle. Over the past 4 or so years, we've kind of expanded that platform. So now we're a technology layer which not only caters for your payments and FX, but also collecting funds overseas. We've launched an issuing product, so we can issue virtual cards. And later on this year, we'll be launching an acquiring product as well, our own payment gateway. So really one platform to help businesses expand internationally. And we've done that as a business. That's how we came to Europe, but also how we expanded into Hong Kong and China and San Francisco. You know, we've been through that journey ourselves around international expansion.
Yeah, I understand that. And just for context, I understand you're quite like Currency Cloud for people who know that business. People talk about you in the same sentence, for people I've spoken to. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say we're probably a blend of that model, and then you can compare it to someone like a Stripe on the issuing and the card acceptance space, and then also traditional FX, where we just are offering transparent FX rates to our clients. So we're kind of, I would say, a mismatch of all of those companies.
Those big companies.
Yeah.
Okay, so why London, apart from Buckingham Palace and PIMS? Was it a good choice?
Yeah, it's a very good choice. I think London is still unique. I think even post Brexit, there was lots of talk about Paris or Frankfurt, or another European hub becoming that sort of draw for fintech in Europe. But the fact is, over the past 40 or 50 years, there's been not that much, I would say, diversification in terms of financial services in Europe. Most big banks come to London for quite a few reasons. There's not only the talent in London, so you have the experienced people you need to build a company. We have a very good regulator. The FCA is very fintech friendly, really gets our products and wants to help. But also the government as well. The government's always been very friendly towards fintechs. I think expanding as we did from Australia, we went first into APAC, and then we came over to Europe and then the US. London still seemed the natural fit for us for all those things. So I don't think we've seen another financial centre in Europe emerge over the past few years. But also you've got to think about, it's not just the people, it's all the ancillary services. So where do people want to live? Where do their kids go to school? That is still very much London. And pros and cons, right? I mean, if you look at our country here in the UK compared to, say, Germany, we have maybe 4 or 5 different regional centres. The UK is very London centric, so that's a downside. If you live in the north of England,
although it may be changing with COVID. Exactly,
which is changing slowly but surely. But I think London has that draw of the government, the regulator, but also the talent here people need for their businesses.
So what prompted the decision then to move here? What was the kind of catalyst? What made you guys decide, yeah, we're ready?
I think in our business, what we specialize in is international payments. So if we just stayed in Australia for 4 years, we would have very limited international infrastructure and new markets. So our product, sending a payment from Australia to the UK, for example, it's much more seamless, lower cost, faster if we have a UK entity and if we can access the financial system here directly rather than going via a third party. So that's why I think we've got 10 offices now around the world, but that was the initial reason for setting up the European hub, is having that access directly into this market, because it's never the same as going indirect.
So very much like a practical, regulatory push then.
Yes, but also I suppose to go back to what Andrew was saying on trust, and just coming from trust from a different angle, is if you then want to build a business out in the UK, but you're based in Australia, UK businesses are going to have a harder time. It's not that they don't trust the Australian business, but it's an extra barrier, an extra hurdle. So if you're a UK business, UK office, UK phone number, it makes it a lot easier to get those clients over the trust threshold.
And was there consensus among the leadership team, do you know? And if not, about London? And if not, how did you reach it? Or was there, generally an agreement that this was the place to be?
Yeah, I think there was a consensus. So there wasn't anyone, I'm talking about Europe here, where we want to be in Europe in terms of London. I think most people in the leadership team have had some experience in London, either worked in London or visited London, and they can see the benefits for themselves when they've either worked here or visited here. So for us as a business, I think we started with the regulation. Where can we go in the world where we can find a regulator that understands fintech, understands our business model, and will support us through that process. So that was number one checkbox in London. Number two is, where do we find people? I think it's sometimes overlooked, and you think, you can set up a business in, a cheaper location if you went to the south of Europe or Eastern Europe, but you're not going to have the people with that experience, especially in fintech. If you look at the world, Europe is probably 10 to 15 years ahead of the rest of the world in terms of fintech, and especially in our sector in terms of payments.
Yeah, maybe bar China.
Yeah, exactly. So China is a bit different in that China is very big on the consumer fintech side. So I would say that companies we've had established in Europe for, 20, 30 years now have kind of led the way. So you have all that experience, all that knowledge, but then also you have the banks here, and you have a lot of people in banks who want to come work in a fintech and bring that knowledge with them. So that was kind of the reasons for London.
And in terms of some of the key logistical considerations you had to, get in place to make the move, can you talk us through kind of the process? Did you get boots on the ground quite early? Those first few hires, obviously money in the bank. Not everyone can raise 130 million Series D, but I guess that was a consideration as well. So just some of those kind of key obstacles that you knew you had to get in place.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that those first sort of 6 to 12 months are the hardest when you're sort of setting up and building a team on the ground. So I joined Airwallex in 2017 when they set up the European entity. So I was at another UK fintech at that time. So I think that goes to the point of, finding people with that experience. I already have been through that with another large European, UK-based fintech. So I joined and I kind of understood what needed to be done. I think don't underestimate the value of a network and finding people locally with that network to shortcut and really get set up quickly. The bank thing is very interesting, because we had, the problem we had was, it's not having the money, it's getting the bank account. That was the most difficult thing for a new company entering a country, is how do you get a bank account? Because, no one knows who you are, and you're having to go through that process of AML, KYC. So getting set up quickly, getting boots on the ground, but also understanding what you then need to do for the next 12 months to be successful in the market. So for us, it was the license. So day one, it was how do we start working on the license? And day two was going out to our network and who can help us get there. That's what another good thing about London, which shouldn't be underestimated, but also the UK in terms of fintech, everyone's very willing to help. So, you know, we weren't always a Series D startup with hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. You know, we were also, when I joined, 20 people globally, scrappy, trying to start this business. People were very, very helpful with their and generous with their time to help us get off the ground.
Someone's asked from the audience, Dan has asked, if you could answer very quickly, will Airwallex need to make changes given Brexit? I guess that comes down to the timing in which you came into the UK.
Yes, yeah. So we're licensed in the UK at the moment. We're going through a secondary license at the moment in another EU state. So that's the biggest one for us. Europe is a huge market, but it's very fragmented. So if we have to, we're selling it to the UK market at the moment, our product, but for each country we need a separate rollout plan. So Brexit or no Brexit, would have to invest in other European countries to build out those teams locally. Okay,
brilliant. And maybe this answers the next question, but what was the biggest challenge once you arrived in the UK? I mean, obviously the license is always going to be a challenge, maybe, but Brexit, what was the biggest kind of bugbear that you had to deal with?
So Brexit, we knew Brexit was happening because that was 2016, but the biggest problem with Brexit is it's just a huge time sap for everyone's, you know, lives, just in terms of getting ready for something where we have no certainty on. So that was the big issue. The biggest problem is no one knows who you are. So when you're new in the country, new in the market, literally no one knows who Airwallex is. No one can even pronounce your name.
Sorry. Guilty.
But I think that's the biggest challenge, and especially because we're not consumer facing. So we're not going to advertise on the side of a bus or the tube, or we're not going to do Instagram ads because we're catering for businesses. So it's how do you get that message out? So again, that comes back down to network and looking at who can help you. So we got a huge amount of help from Department of International Trade, the Victorian government back in Australia have teams here who can help companies expand. So look around what help is available. Things like this, like doing your own sort of webinars or putting content out there is really valuable. You know, we started doing events as soon as we came here. I think, you know, we had a handful of people at the first one. If you get one person, it's a success, right? So you've got to start small and not get disheartened and just stick with it.
That's a very optimistic outlook. If you have one person, it's a success. Did you have an exit strategy in case London didn't prove to be what you'd hoped it would be?
We didn't have a specific exit strategy. So we have obviously a wind down plan if things don't work out for any reason. But for us, London's strategically important, not only because of our business here, but also the teams we've built here and the people we found. So we've got about 10, 12 people here at the moment, probably looking to double this year, but we never had okay, what as this goes wrong, how do we leave the market, aside from our wind down plan for the business. So no, we never thought about, you know, what if it doesn't work out, because I think you can dwell on that too much, and that's one of the challenges of the startup, right? You know, there's such a high chance of failure. You've just got to stick with it and keep on going.
Yeah, I think the one reflection that I've seen of fintechs perhaps going over to the US is sometimes it can feel like a vanity project, you know, that I'm sure there are strategy and reasons behind it, but often the kind of rationale can seem to come after they're there and after they've got boots on the ground. It sounds like you very much had a plan in place and you knew why you were coming. But would you dissuade against, you know, seeing London as this glamorous, as I say, vanity project? Because obviously the reality is it is quite a hard place to make a success of. And perhaps, you know, that there are some distinctions there between wanting to expand into as I say, a glamorous area or clearly the heart of financial services versus a real need to.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I really do think it depends on what your product is. So does your product suit the market in London? Do you need to be in London? Do your consumers care if you're in London? You know, one big reason of being in London for us when we launched was the access to the global banks, which were all here, and the fact that I could, in a day, I could go around and see, you know, 10 different banks, which we don't do anymore because of COVID. So that has kind of gone away. I think London is a good, okay, not London, but being regulated by the FCA is a good rubber stamp of your business to show that, you know, you've got the strength of that strong regulator behind you. I think your point on the US, I think a lot of companies go there thinking that it's a scalable 300 million person market, but I think it's a bit more like Europe in that you have to really craft your product per region in the US because it's such a huge place. So yeah, I mean, it really depends on your product and your ambitions for your company. And if you think your client base care about where you are, or if they're happy you're being in Berlin, then go to Berlin, like if it's cheaper. Like, yeah, it really depends on your product.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, James. Hopefully that was interesting to speak to, share your thoughts, and hopefully interesting for our audience to hear a first-hand experience of what it's like to jump into the UK. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Isabel. Cheers.